From Berlin. The January 6th attack on the US Capitol 1 year on. In a speech to the nation, President Joe Biden takes aim at Donald Trump.
The former President of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election because his bruised ego matters more to him than our democracy or our Constitution.
Biden says the Trump supporters who stormed the Capitol held a dagger to the throat of American democracy. Also coming up, fresh violence rocks the main city of Kazakhstan as security forces continue a crackdown on protesters. Dozens have been killed in the worst unrest for 30 years. The president appeals for help, and former Soviet states led by Russia send in troops. Plus,
keeping him as a prisoner is just not fair. It's not human.
Novak Djokovic's family slams Australia for rejecting his visa and sending him to a detention hotel. The tennis star is challenging moves to deport him over COVID-19 entry requirements. I'm Anthony Howard. Welcome to the program. US President Joe Biden has marked the first anniversary of the storming of the US Capitol when a violent mob of Trump supporters tried to stop the certification of the 2020 presidential election. A year to the day since those shocking events, Biden launched an outspoken attack on the rioters and his predecessor, Donald Trump, who he said set the stage for the attack by continuously sowing doubt about the result of the 2020 election.
Tight security for a dark anniversary. American leaders mark a day of remembrance at Capitol Hill, exactly 1 year after rioters stormed the building. Supporters of former President Donald Trump had sought to overturn the election result after the former president made false claims of election fraud.
We fight like hell.
1 year on, President Biden condemned the rioters and their attempts to undermine American democracy.
Madam Vice President, they failed. And on this day of remembrance, we must make sure that such attack never happens again.
But he focused his strongest words on one target in particular, former President Donald Trump.
He tried to prevent. The former President of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election. He's done so because he values power over principle and because his bruised ego matters more to him than our democracy or our Constitution.
After a year of largely ignoring his predecessor, Biden decided to take the gloves off.
He's not just a former president. He's a defeated former president. Defeated by a margin of over 7 million of your votes.
In a written statement after the speech, Trump accused Biden of using his name to further divide America, calling the speech political theater and a distraction from Biden's failures. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, led a minute of silence, remembering the security personnel whose deaths have been attributed to the attack.
Because of them and our members, the insurrection failed.
This small event was attended by only 2 Republicans, highlighting the deep partisan divisions that remain in America's polarized two-party system.
And January 6 wasn't just a moment in which American democracy was in danger. US House of Representative members experienced personal peril firsthand as rioters rampaged through the halls of Congress and then banged on the doors of the chamber. Some of those representatives have relived that day in a ceremony marking the first anniversary.
1 year later, it is essential that we do not allow anyone to rewrite history or whitewash the gravity of what took place. It is our duty to find the facts of January 6th to ensure that such an assault on our democracy cannot happen again.
January 6th was my 4th day in office. January 6th was my first time ever to the House Gallery. I'll never forget introducing myself to my colleagues as we were hiding under the chairs, fashioning weapons out of stanchions and pens and my high heels, ready to take on the rioters who were banging on the doors behind us, waiting for the elevator door to open. Sure, we were going to see a machine gun and for it all to be over. The Capitol police officer who put his body in the way in case that happened.
And I remember I was laying on the floor and I had just a very little bit of juice left in my cell phone. And I wanted to call my husband, wanted to call Stan. I was afraid to say, I love you, because it harkened back to September 11th and those last calls. So I just said, I'm all right. Tell the kids I'm all right.
My dear friend and late colleague, Congressman John Lewis, said, our struggle is not a struggle of a day, a week, a month, a year. It is a struggle of a lifetime. So January 6th reminds us that even in the face of a struggle and insurmountable barriers, our democracy will stand.
We're gonna heal the hate.
Let me hear you sing it out.
We're gonna heal the hate in this nation. We're gonna heal the hate.
Let me hear you sing it out.
We're gonna heal the hate in this nation. We're gonna heal the hate.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Rashawn Ray. He's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. Great to have your time, Mr. Ray. Politics and society in the US are increasingly clearly polarised. With a year to process the data and the demographics, can you tell us what we know now of the ideological roots of a movement that tried to overturn an election?
Well, it's very clear, and it was very clear to me on that day 1 year ago, that people were storming the Capitol not simply to protest the election, but to maintain white supremacy for only a few small group of people. We know that because a noose was hanging. There was someone wearing an Auschwitz concentration camp shirt. There was someone else hanging a Confederate flag. We know that hundreds of people stormed the Capitol. Thousands of people were there. It left many people injured, including 140 police officers, many of whom were trying to defend the Capitol, but some of whom were also complicit in that. At the end of the day, it left 5 people dead in total, even after the insurrection from what happened then. And then we know that the Department of Justice has charged over 700 people with crimes from that particular event. But we also know some of those individuals who stormed the Capitol have now ran for office and then got elected. It speaks to a highly divided America.
The Republican Party has fallen in line since with Trump's big lie, the false claim that the 2020 election was stolen. It is now restricting voting rights and changing voting laws. Do you fear genuinely for democracy in the US at this point?
I do. So I just wrote an article at Brookings with some of my colleagues, and I talked about the simple fact of a key question. Is the democratic experiment in the United States over? That people, regardless of their political orientation, are tired of the polarization, and they actually have a deep distrust for government. Our overly simplistic two-party system might have already ran its course. And we even saw that today with Biden's speech, where, of course, it was about Trump. Of course, it was about the insurrection. But there were some people who thought that it was still a campaign speech looking forward to the 2022 midterms and even to the 2024 election, where it's very clear he said he's going to run again. I think he thinks he's going to run against Trump again. So we haven't seen a lot of movement beyond the Department of Justice. Voting rights is not passed. We have also not seen any movement on police reform at the federal level. And then Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan, which is going to help all Americans, regardless of political orientation, regardless of background, has yet to come up for vote in the Senate. This type of polarization speaks to a highly problematic America that many people fear.
Mr. Ray, just quickly before we go, are Americans scared enough about the future of democracy in that country?
I think so. I mean, look, we're seeing not only a wave of people attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion, but in the South, in states like Tennessee and Georgia, states where I grew up at and where I'm born, now you don't even have to have a license to carry a gun. I think people are highly worried, people are scared, and fear is really driving polarization and inequality in America.
Rashawn Ray, Senior Fellow at Brookings, thank you so much for your time.
Danke schön. Tschüss.
Well, Russia has sent Paris